Hello! Today we are talking about outlines. An outline of a book is basically just a list of all of the scenes that you want in the book. When you're reviewing your book, it's super nice to just look at all of your content without actually having to read all of it. You can move scenes, you can change scenes, you can make sure that the information in scenes is correct, and you can avoid loopholes. Seeing all of your content in one nice, organized format can really help you improve on the overall structure of the book. So today I'm going to be covering how to make an outline and what kind of scenes are important to have in your book. Before we get into how to write an outline, we need to cover a few of the terms that I'm going to be talking about today. These terms just cover what kind of scenes are going to be in your book. An action scene is any scene that pushes the plot forward. This doesn't necessarily mean that there has to be fighting or anything in it. It just needs to give the reader something to grab onto. So this could be anything from getting information about something tragic happening or a fight scene if you really want. A character scene is anything from character development to information on character backgrounds or traits, anything that relates around the character or a few of the characters. Information scenes are important because they give the reader the information that they need to follow along with the story. You may understand that the term filler is something that's not important to a book or to a movie or to a TV show, but for me, filler scenes are not something that is just thrown in there. I only add filler scenes, I only add any sort of scene if it gives the book more depth or it gives some sort of information. I never add scenes that are not important to the book or to the story or to a character. So when I say filler, I just mean that it's kind of drawn back from the story. It might be kind of a humorous scene, and filler scenes are really good to pull the reader back from all of the action that is going on and give them a sort of break. It's really up to you on the format that you want to lay those scenes out in. Today I'm just going to walk you through an outline that I have done. It's just something random that I've done, and it just shows you what I'm talking about and what kind of scenes are going to be important in your book. So without further ado, let's jump into our book. So up here I have just redefined all of the terms that I've already covered. This just covers action, which is anything that pushes the plot forward, and character just gives information or development to a character. Information gives reader insight to what is going on in the story. Filler is not necessary for the reader to know, but it does give a break from action and still adds to the story. So this is just an outline of what I would typically write. I wouldn't necessarily hold to this once I start writing. This is why I also make outlines in later drafts so that I can feel a little bit more free to add whatever scenes that I feel are necessary at the time. I like to have action at the beginning of the book. That's just a preference. If you don't have action right at the beginning of the book, it's not going to be a terrible book or anything. This is just my preference. I feel like having an action scene right at the beginning will be able to draw a reader's attention, but you can definitely draw the reader's attention with a character scene, or you can do it with an information scene. Just my personal preference is an action scene. So that is why I have it first. And once again, an action scene doesn't necessarily mean action-y. It can be something like two characters are driving in the car and they are talking about something that's really important to them. That could even be considered a character or an information scene. And scenes can have all three aspects, or even all four aspects. You can have a scene where you get information and you get character development, but it also takes a break from all of the overpowering action that's going on. So my preference is to add an action scene to introduce the problem and hook the reader. And the next scene is something that I would add information to. This is super important, especially if you have an action scene, to give the reader information on what in the world is going on. Otherwise, you're going to lose the reader's attention because they feel like they're completely lost, and we don't want that to happen. So an information scene right up front is going to be very, very important, especially if you write high fantasy. And if you don't know what high fantasy is, it means that any kind of fantasy that is not on Earth. A high fantasy is very, very, very important to have information so that you grab the reader's attention and then you explain exactly what is going on. So if you just drop the reader into a world that they aren't familiar in, they're going to feel lost. And with that information scene, we're going to give them the information that they really need so that they're not lost. Now, a character scene is also very important because your characters are going to be the ones that the reader are following along throughout the whole story. So your reader needs to feel interested in the character, especially the main character. You can introduce other characters as well in character scenes, but a character scene is very important so that your reader feels a connection to your main character or several of your main characters. We want to be able to get them emotionally attached to the character, and the only way that you can get them emotionally attached is by giving them information on the character and showing what the character is like and what their personality is like, maybe even a little bit about their background, but you can add their background later on in the story. It does not have to be right up front. You can add little snippets of their background, but it's not very important right up front. The most important thing for the reader to know about your character is personality. When you do this first character scene, you really want to make sure that your character is expressing themselves and they are showing what kind of personality they have. So a filler, this is just something that I would put in. You can add an action scene here if you want. It just really depends on the kind of book that you're writing. But for me, I really enjoy fillers because it just gives me a chance to write about whatever I want while also something to have fun with. It gives the reader a chance to see the character or the plot in a different view. Filler can be anything from a couple of characters talking to even just a walk in the park and feeding pigeons, whatever you want it to be. But my only rule to fillers is that it must add to the story or character. So make sure that those fillers are still giving character development, or they are adding lore, anything to just add to your book. You don't want to be adding fillers that the reader feels is completely unnecessary. They are going to lose attention and they're going to think that the entire book is going to be filled with completely unnecessary content. So you want to make sure that the first few fillers are going to be very drawing and fun and interesting, and they still give some sort of character information or plot information or lore information. So next I would add another character scene. Once again, this is just preference, but I am very particular about my readers understanding my characters. This is where I would add new characters and also give character development or character information on the characters that are already in the book. This just solidifies the reader's interest in a character while also possibly adding new characters for the reader to love. The next is another action or information scene. So we'll drive the plot forward because we have just gotten all of this information on characters and possibly lore, and now we need to remind the reader that the plot is still going on. We need to draw the focus away from the characters now and back to the plot to remind them that the plot is still important. I prefer a couple of scenes in a row of action just to make sure that the plot is very important. And then we're going to step away from it again to almost give the reader a little tease on what the action actually is. So we want to introduce the plot back but we don't want to give all of the plot away. We want to make sure that the reader is interested, but they don't get information overload with all of the action that's going on. So we're going to go back to a character scene. And this can be a completely different character. This does not have to be your main character. We want to make sure that all of these characters feel important, that they all have some sort of role to play, and that the plot is going to be influenced by all of them. So here I would probably have another filler. This one I would not have a very long scene. I want that action to come back, and we don't want to tease our readers with action and then just not have any action for a while. So I would make this filler be pretty small, only maybe a few pages long, and then get back to the action. This action scene, I would want very important things to come up. It's right in the middle of the book, and we need to make sure that the reader knows that, okay, we're learning all of this stuff about characters, we're having fun along the way, but the plot is definitely still important. So this action scene, I would definitely add some really important stuff to it so that the reader is interested in where the plot is actually going. So this information scene is going to be very important because I am going to relate this information scene back to that action scene that just happened. So I would want to reiterate what happened in that action scene and draw attention to it. Now, since that is such an intense action and information scene, we don't want to overwhelm the reader. So the next scene I would either add would be a character or a filler, and I would want to dull down the overwhelmingness of the plot right now. So I would want to focus on a character and how the character is feeling about all of this action that's going on, and figure out what this is going to do to the characters that by now the reader should be interested in. So if the reader is interested in these characters, they're going to be interested in how these characters are feeling. So I would want to add this character scene to give the reader an insight into what these characters are thinking about what's going on. This next scene is an action scene that leads up to the resolve. This does not mean that it's leading up to the climax. An action scene that is leading up to the resolve is giving the reader the best outcome of what's going on. So this could be the characters are talking about, well, okay, well, what do we do now? Well, we could do this, and if all goes well, then this is going to be the outcome. So we want to show the reader what the characters are being driven by and what their purpose is in the story now. We want to make sure that the plot is solidified, and there needs to be an overall goal in where this book is going to actually end up leading to. This next scene is going to be another filler or an information or a character scene, because up until this point, these last few scenes have been very intense, they've been very plot driven. We want to take a step back and remind the reader that these characters are human and they have other things that are going on in their life maybe, and we want to show that not all of this is only plot related. We want to make sure that they know that the characters have other things that they're thinking about, and they're maybe trying to think about other things, and this gives a sense of humanity in the characters. This also leads up to the next scene, which is going to be a very intense action. This doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be the climax, but it can be something like one of the main characters is taken or something that's really, really intense and puts the reader on the edge of their seat, wondering what in the world is going to happen. The next scene is going to be a very important character scene because this is going to show exactly what the characters are thinking of. Are they freaking out? Are they calm about it? We need to know that kind of information because it's very important for character development, especially if you have multiple books in a series. This kind of character development is some of the most important. We need to see the characters in panic mode so that, or not necessarily panic mode, but we need to see what the characters are thinking about in this climactic action situation that's going on. And then the next scene is the climax. This is going to be the most intense scene, or one of the most intense scenes in the book. This doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be a war happening or a battle, but this is going to be something that the book has been leading up to, and now it's actually finally here. What's going to happen? This does not mean that this is at the absolute end of the book. I like to have the climax like right up at the 80% mark or 75% mark so that we can have some downtime after the climax. So the book has been leading up to the climax, and now it's here. What's going to happen? It doesn't necessarily mean that the climax has to be something that the readers are going to enjoy. It can be something that the readers aren't expecting. It can even be something that the readers are mad about. I mean, if you really want to have the action, the climax scene, to be something that is completely twisted and something that's going to throw everything completely out the window, then go for it. It's your book, but the climax is very, very important, and all books need a climax to give the book a point. So you need to have this climax, and then right after is the resolve. And this is the outcome. Whether this means that the outcome is what the characters were thinking, what the readers were thinking, that's completely up to you. But the resolve needs to show the reader what is happening after this huge thing that just happened. How are the characters taking it? And what is going to be the next step for the characters and even the plot. These are scenes that I personally would add after a climax and resolve, but to each their own, and every book is going to be a little different, and everybody writes a little differently. So if you would prefer to have nothing after this, then that's totally fine. But I personally, my personal preference is going to have a character scene, which is going to show the reader what the characters are thinking about after everything has been completely resolved, maybe a few weeks or a few days after. How are they feeling? How are they taking this resolve, and what is going to be their next steps? The next one, personally, once again, this is just my preference, but I would add a filler just to kind of wrap up any questions that the reader may have had throughout the course of the book. And then finally, I would like an action scene at the end. I like action scenes at the end. I know a lot of people don't, which is why I said optional, because this is not something that you have to follow. A lot of people do not like action scenes at the end, but I personally do, and especially if this is going to be in a series, I definitely like to have an action scene at the end to show the reader that there's more to the story than just this book. So this can be kind of a teaser on what the plot of the next book is going to be. I want to have that action scene to open up to the next book, at least open up to the option of the next book. Personally, I like to add which characters are in the scene and a very simplified description of what the scene is actually pertaining. If you do this with your first draft, you may want to redo it for your second draft. You may want to write out all of the scenes that you have in your first draft, look at it all from a far back perspective, and decide whether you want to move things or if you want to add things. You may even want to trash things. You should not feel like all of this is set in stone once you write out the outline. The outline is really just there for your convenience so that you can see everything the way that it is without having to scroll a bunch. Once you start writing and once you start figuring out what you find important in your book, then this is going to change. Every book is going to be different. information is going to be different and you're going to want to add different things to different books. But the only way that you can realize what your own personal preferences are is by writing. So just start writing. And if you have any writing or roleplay specific topics that you would like me to cover in future videos, then please let me know and I will do my best to cover them. Until then, I really hope that this helps on any of your writing projects, and I wish you the best of luck in your writing endeavors. I will see you guys next week. Bye!